The government warehouse. This story begins with my job, a job I took out of my family's desperation. We needed the money, they were barely scraping by while I was in the military. So when I returned, I needed something, it didn't matter what it cost me, but I paid a price higher than I could imagine. My military experience goes far back, that's why I qualified for this job. But I should have known better than to accept something with a secretive government brand slapped onto it. Hopefully this entry will deter others away from my mistake. It was too perfect. We didn't even have to move, the facility was only about a 2-hour drive through the desert from my home. It has top benefits and pay, just an easy guarding job on paper, worth the drive 10 times over. I thought the late nights would be troublesome, but worth it in the end. Although, it was not worth this thing, following my every step. Or its sound, that constant, high-pitched noise. I can only pray to any god that might be out there that it won't hunt my family next. Even as I write this, my final entry, it's watching me. It's just over my shoulder, with those damned eyeless sockets. Its breathing is a constant reminder that it's there, if you could call it breathing. It's as if I was assigned a demon by God, instead of an angel to guard over me, but I would rather have it just kill me. When Jeremy talked about this thing, I didn't believe him. When his voice shook with fear, and he covered his eyes and ears from a supposedly inhuman form, and sanity-piercing sound cutting through his sanity, I didn't believe him. No one did, not before and not during the incident, but maybe we just didn't want to believe him. All of us had seen our fair share of strange things at that facility, but some of us don't live to tell out gruesome tales. The job was simple, guard these chambers that you were told to inside this massive government warehouse. We weren't always allowed to know what we were guarding, but most times we didn't want to know. They would just primarily tell us how to stay alive near their experiments. Once you were in the job, you weren't out until they picked the information clean out of you. A very painful procedure. I should have quit. We had a breach at the facility. We all thought it was just some punk kids, wanting to get some pictures or something like usual. It seemed like stragglers were always curious about the government projects, but would always regret it when they see. The public doesn't know about this for a reason. We were all told to open fire if anyone so much as poked their finger through the first line of fences. Only Jeremy has had to actually shoot someone at the gate, but the man didn't die. We haven't heard anything about him since. None of us panicked like we should have with the breach, just some kids. None of us knew what was coming, but it had to be just some kids, or else it threatened our created state of denial. A sweet bliss. We were surprised when we heard our commander blare over the intercom, breach code, Delta 09. This is not a drill. Repeat, Delta 09. This is not a drill. Delta 09 was a code that instructed everyone to report to their nearest specimen lockup to guard it, whether we had been briefed on the things inside or not. I was with Jeremy and a new recruit, Ben, and our nearest chambers were Sector 3. The only time they enforced guarding on subjects you didn't know about, was when there was a true emergency. I should have quit. We all should have run. We waited for further orders over our talkies or the intercom, but no more came. Within an hour, the power had been shut off, and by everything not coming back on immediately, so had the emergency generators. We only had the dim light of our helmets' headlamps. That's when we knew these intruders meant business. Whoever it was would be worse than killed if we all survived this. We tried contacting anyone on the talkies, but they seemed to be broken too. All we could hear from them was static. There were large crashes all throughout the facility, and everything began to smell strangely like used oil. We could tell by the distant screams that subjects had likely escaped, and that made our fake dream of ignorance nearly fall to pieces, replaced by fear. They were careful to stop this in our training, but nothing could truly prepare us for this. Jeremy and Ben walked with me, as we approached a large, 7-foot thick, steel door in front of us. It read 3C, but I squinted as I saw the door simply disappear. By the looks on Ben and Jeremy's faces, they had seen it too. The large door was just gone, 1 second there, and the next, not. Our radios began to violently come on and go haywire with loud static, like they had a life of their own. We took our glance from the radios and aimed our weapons at the missing door, but the chamber was empty. We shared confused and afraid glances between ourselves. I didn't know what specimen was behind there, or if one was there at all, so I turned to ask my team. But before I could, Ben was turned to Jeremy on the floor, who was holding a hand to his face, as if trying to block a bright light. He whimpered like a dog, and stammered as he shakily pointed. "Fire!" He yelled it loud enough to echo far through the dark halls. Me and Ben shared more confused looks. There was nothing where Jeremy was pointing. "Shoot! Damn it!" he was pleading, but we couldn't open fire at nothing, but we should have. Maybe that would have done something. It was my fault. Ben aimed, but I stopped him. I pushed his gun down, and said, "That won't do anything. We should check out Sector 3's specimen reports, and see if that offers up anything. The nearest codex shouldn't be too far from here." I was their superior, and I failed them. Jeremy was frozen on the floor, not saying a single word. I told Jeremy, "We'll be back, we have to check out the reports." "It could have something." "What do you mean?" Jeremy demanded of me. "It's right there. Shoot it." Ben gave me a concerned look. "Sir, maybe we should." "No, we have to check those reports out," I insisted, but I now realize it was because a primal part of me didn't want to be anywhere near that thing whether I could see it or not. Jeremy looked up, suddenly terrified as if he just caught up with our conversation. No, don't leave me alone with this thing. Please." I stared at him, panicked inside. "Sorry Jeremy, but if there is something there, you need to stay near the cage in case we can recapture it." "Let's go, Ben." When Ben didn't move, I turned back around. "All due respect, sir, but I think I'll stay with Jeremy." "Fine. I'll be back soon then." I was annoyed with Ben. I only wish I knew that was one of the last peaceful moments. I would always have to go to the codex to re-educate myself about the subjects every time I was reassigned, but they wouldn't let us leave this facility with knowledge of these things. They wouldn't even allow us to learn about any out of our jurisdiction. But I guess there wouldn't have been a point. Along the way, I didn't pass another walking person, or hear another scream. It looked as empty as the black halls felt. Except, I could have sworn I kept seeing and feeling something watching me constantly from my back. Eventually, I did see a body, laid against the shadows of a wall. It sat there, almost as if it was a taunt, or bait. There was blood everywhere, but I couldn't be bothered. My denial was embedded deep within me, but the fear was beginning to crack my resolve. After that, I thought I caught a few glimpses of a long, toothy smile in the shadows. And maybe a hand, begging me to come close to the darkness. It took me about 15 minutes to reach the codex. I called out, "Hello," hoping someone had the same idea I had had, but no one answered. Looking back, I should have just run from that place entirely, but I was, in a different mindset. I can't accurately explain what I felt at that moment. So I instead retrieved my keycard, and did a manual override on the door. With the electricity out, I couldn't do a simple scan. I had to open the heavy door that led inside, which was hard for one man. Once in, I dug through the countless files in the countless filing cabinets, my slowly dimming headlamp making it near impossible to navigate the labyrinth of papers and shelves. That followed feeling had passed once I entered, but now it tickled the back of my mind once again. I finally found Sector 3 near the back corner of the large room. There were 4 cells to each sector, A, B, C, and D. Sometimes different subjects showed up in different cells, but no one was allowed to interfere, no matter what we heard, or saw. I recalled as I read the papers, it was marked by the scientists as ensuing dominance onto the other creatures. Defeating them and therefore being the better gene. Our subject was 3C, and it only took the description to send shivers down my spine. It was described simply as, long, dark, absent, pointing and a demented stalker. The words were hastily scribbled across the document, and some blood was stained across the top. The men forced into the chambers for testing were mostly death row prisoners, but sometimes they did it to employees that tried to just run with the knowledge. It didn't matter what we did, because we wouldn't remember anyways. But sometimes the memory wipe didn't seem to always work on me specifically. I looked up from the 3C report. I continued to feel that ever-watching presence as it became stronger. I tried to focus back on the document, but couldn't. Stronger. I heard a scream like thunder, and a distant flurry of gunfire from the direction I came from. I couldn't tell if it was real, or in my head. Stronger, soul-wrenching pain. With the distressed thought of Ben and Jeremy, I ran. I passed a withered, outstretched hand, like an autumn's dead branch as I exited the codex. But I didn't scream, I did it right for once, and just ran, dropped the document and ran. I don't know what that other thing was, maybe another subject. All I knew and know is, I'm terrified. Ben kneeled down to Jeremy, checking vitals and things of the sort as he sat in his pale stare. I opened my mouth to speak as I ran up, and Ben spun, his rifle aimed at my chest quick as a whip. I held up my hands, and he dropped the rifle's aim. It was in his eyes, he had seen something. It was the same look Jeremy had. What did you learn? Do you have the report? He asked me, staring hopefully upwards. Jeremy's look had changed, from terror, to a desperate sadness. I lost the report, but read it beforehand. Ben looked slightly disappointed under his terror. I may have run into another subject. But I heard gunshots and a scream down this way, so I hurried back. Are you guys all right? Ben looked confused under that helmet, his features barely visible behind the bright light of the headlamp. I didn't hear anything. That was when Jeremy screamed the same scream I'd heard, like a broken thunderclap, and shot a flurry of bullets into his own head. Ben fell backwards in surprise, getting sprayed by the blood and viscera. We both instantly looked to where Jeremy's dead hand still pointed. Silence. Ben was breathing hard, trying futilely to wipe the gore away. I still don't see terror. Absolute terror. What is it, sir? Do you see it? I stared into its unblinking, absent sockets. Its long, sinuous limbs cast a contrast to its broken, unproportioned head. And its body, if that's what you could call it, was and is, a dark and stringy abomination compiled of broken shards of death, pieced together by the demented depths of blackened infinity. It lifted its cracked branch of an arm, and it pointed at me. After that, I could never work the same. The facility was eventually recontained by measures we weren't allowed to know, but most everyone was wiped of memory, and those who refused were killed. I was among those wiped, but I haven't heard from Ben since. I thought the memory cleansing would clear me of my burden, I thought I would be finally done. But I think it stopped me from forgetting, somehow. I still remember it all. Everything has been slowly coming back. Everything. I've tried, over and over to get rewiped, but it never works. It now makes sense why I could remember, and now they're becoming suspicious of the numerous wipes I've taken. It just brings back more. It's followed me for weeks since, and hasn't let up. Every corner, every shadow, every crevasse, it was there, and still is. I never told them it had picked me, and they're likely still looking for the one it chose to follow. They have ways they can check. But this is where they're wrong. It finds you, they won't find it. I can't take this anymore, if they find out it's following me. I know I shouldn't be so selfish and release this thing into the world, but I can't take it another hour of its demonic gaze. I'm done. My hand is shaking so violently, I can barely write. Mary, I love you, and the kids, that's why I have to do this. I can't meet its soulless gaze anymore. This is goodbye. No more, no more. Stay paranoid, my friends. Reminder that it's there, if you could call it breathing. It's as if I was assigned a demon by God, instead of an angel to guard over me, but I would rather have it just kill me. When Jeremy talked about this thing, I didn't believe him. When his voice shook with fear, and he covered his eyes and ears from a supposedly inhuman form, and sanity-piercing sound cutting through his sanity, I didn't believe him. No one did, not before and not during the incident, but maybe we just didn't want to believe him. All of us had seen our fair share, so when I returned, I needed something. It didn't matter what it cost me, but I paid a price higher than I could imagine. My military experience goes far back, that's why I qualified for this job, but I should have known better than to accept something with a secretive government brand slapped onto it. Hopefully this entry will deter others away from my mistake. It was too perfect. We didn't even have to move, the facility was only about a 2-hour drive through the desert from my home. It has top benefits and pay, just an easy guard. The government warehouse. This story begins with my job, a job I took out of my family's desperation. We needed the money, they were barely scraping by while I was in the military. Starting job on paper, worth the drive 10 times over. I thought the late nights would be troublesome, but worth it in the end. Although, it was not worth this thing, following my every step. Or its sound, that constant, high-pitched noise. I can only pray to any god that might be out there that it won't hunt my family next. Even as I write this, my final entry, it's watching me. It's just over my shoulder, with those damned eyeless sockets. Its breathing is a constant of strange things at that facility, but some of us don't live to tell out gruesome tales. The job was simple, guard these chambers that you were told to inside this massive government warehouse. We weren't always allowed to know what we were guarding, but most times we didn't want to know. They would just primarily tell us how to stay alive near their experiments. Once you were in the job, you weren't out until they picked the information clean out of you, a very painful procedure. I should have quit. We had a breach at the facility.